Díagríomh go léir a cóide agus tá fáilte ród. Welcome to my story with me, Mary Honan, on Lear Media. Now, my very wonderful guest today is Shira Leibowitz from New York in the United States. And I'd like you all to join me in welcoming Shira to my story. Hi, how are you, Shira?
Thank you so much. I'm so happy to be here and so happy to meet you.
And indeed, you. Shira, I was looking at LinkedIn when I saw you, and to be honest with you, what really struck with me was you're talking to people about how you had suffered a clot and how you had found that clot very, very quickly, thank God, which actually helped to save your life. Could you explain to us that backstory, Shira?
Absolutely. I believe that I was blessed with a miracle. I had entirely by accident discovered that I had a very odd-shaped aneurysm right between my eyes and my brain. I didn't know it was there. It was never symptomatic. And one day I got a little rash on my face, ignored it. The next day, my face had blown up 4 times its size. I sealed shut. I looked literally like a very expert makeup artist had made me up to be a zombie creature in some kind of horror. I looked absolutely horrifying. And I went to urgent care, and the urgent care doctor was very concerned, which was alarming, told me he was most worried about the eye and that I might go blind. And I had to see an optometrist today. And if I couldn't, I had to get to the emergency room. He made me an appointment, but that was that afternoon. It was the morning and my face kept getting worse. So I went to the emergency room, and they didn't know what it was. They wanted to rule out or rule in, figure out if there was internal damage. So they did an MRI. They told me I was fine. They told me it was on the skin, told me to go to a dermatologist, go to the optometrist. And I left, and the doctor laughingly said to me, "Don't take this wrong, but I hope I never see you again." And I cracked up and said, "Same to you. Thanks so much." And I left. And the next day I went to a dermatologist who looked at me and immediately said, "I'll do a biopsy, but that's poison ivy." It was a really wicked case.
Can I interject there? I hope you will never see him again.
I hope I will never see him again. So that becomes part of the story. I haven't. So this dermatologist knew instantly this was a wicked case of poison ivy. It was miraculous that I got the poison ivy to begin with, because I realized that I got it from my dog. I walked my dog. This is the only time, and he'd realized that my dog was kind of itching himself a lot. Dog has never had poison ivy before or since. And this is a dog who is a love and a blessing and hates to be pet. So we don't pet him because we respect who he is for who he is, how he is. So every so often at the end of the walk, I kind of sneak in a little pet when I'm taking off the leash when he won't notice. I must have done that. I must have touched my face. This was still in the midst of COVID. I run a child care center and preschool that was open throughout, and trained myself not to touch my face without washing my hands. So the fact that I pet the dog, I touch my face without washing my hands, none of that ever should have happened. I never should have had that poison ivy. Okay. So I go to the pharmacy waiting for the meds because I want this healed. Was healed by the next day with the medication she gave me. But as I'm waiting for the meds, I get a call from the emergency room saying, "We're following up with your neurology appointment." And I say, "You must have the wrong person because I have poison ivy." So they said, "You have an aneurysm."
Wow.
And the doctor, for some reason, hadn't seen it, hadn't read it. They looked back later. They have checks and balances in place, which are really good. That was a whole other piece. The head of the emergency room called me, and I wasn't concerned about the doctor's mistake or error, and kept saying, it's okay. Just tell me what's wrong and what I have to do. They set me up with the first appointment that they could get me with the first neurologist close to home that they could get me with. So I did zero research on who this neurologist was.
Yeah, you're just glad to get somebody.
Just get me in somewhere. And He said, it's small, but it's in a very strange shape. At this point, I didn't know where it was. And I need to send you to my partner, who's a specialist. And in this, I live north of New York City, so this is at Montefiore, which is in the Bronx in the city, and has a higher level of specialization. So, okay, I go to this doctor, and long story short, he does the angiogram, this super fancy photo shoot of my brain, and tells me that I'm not eligible. There's basically three things you can do for an aneurysm. You can watch it to see if it doesn't grow. You can there's a less invasive surgery where you go in through the artery and put a device that kind of plugs it. Or there's very invasive brain surgery. Finish the angiogram, and I'm waiting there, and he comes and says, because of the shape, you're not eligible for the less invasive surgery, and he leaves. And I'm waiting to be brought back to where my husband is and crying and preparing myself mentally for this very serious brain surgery. I was going to do it. I didn't want this aneurysm in my brain. We go for the follow-up appointment where he says, we'll talk about it. He goes through the three options and then says, but we have a fourth option. And that changed everything. Just the week before, the week I had the angiogram, the FDA in the United States had approved an experimental procedure that had been done in Europe for the past 18 months before this, but not yet in the United States. The FDA was slower to approve it. And it was a different shaped device. So essentially what they do is they go in through your artery, put this device at the base of the aneurysm. Your own blood can flow in, but can't flow out. So your own blood goes in, clots, and closes up the artery, which to me is mind-blowing and remarkable. And there was approval for this new device, and only 2 doctors in the United States were approved to do this surgery, this doctor and one in Florida. So without any research, I had ended up with one of the only 2 doctors in the United States that does the surgery. Had I ended up anywhere else, they might not have even known the surgery existed to refer me someplace else.
Yeah.
So I had the surgery. I am a card-carrying cyborg. There is a piece of metal in my brain helping it to function.
Shira, isn't it amazing how these things can actually... I don't understand. As somebody, I told you off camera, my father was only 59 and he was a paramedic for years in England before he came home to Ireland. So he, like you, he knew there was something wrong. And when I think back on it now, he was doing a lot of this with his hand when he'd be sitting down, and he'd have to stop when he was walking and try and straighten his back. You don't notice these things at the time. You just don't notice them. And he went and he was told, no, that you don't have a clot. And he said, I'm sure I have a clot. And the doctor said, no, you don't. And he was dead the following morning with the clot. And, I found it incredibly hard to forgive. In fact, I never forgave really the doctor, because he was a family doctor. We knew him very well, and I just couldn't understand, what I saw as arrogance, that when you're in doubt any slight way, wouldn't you imagine they would suggest going to a specialist instead of you having to go? I mean, you didn't need that phrase from him, such as, I hope I never see you again. You went to him for an answer to what was a very obvious.
Yeah. So, I would say yes, and first of all, I am so incredibly sorry for your loss, and it's so painful. And I have heard more stories like that since, and am grateful, so profoundly grateful every day. I actually didn't know anything was wrong. My aneurysm was entirely asymptomatic, as they sometimes are. And tiny. It was really, really tiny. Yeah.
Tiny. It can be just as detrimental to you.
Yes, well, the size was reassuring to them. The place where it was in my brain was what made them very nervous. So I do not take for granted. I feel profoundly blessed that I got the poison ivy, that it happened exactly when it did, that I ended up by chance at this particular doctor, this particular week, once the FDA had approved this procedure. I was the third person the doctor did this procedure for, one of the very first in the United States to have the procedure. And without it, not having found this, I could have been fine one moment and dead the next. I know
Yeah.
that. And I'm so, I feel like I won the cosmic lottery and was gifted with more years that, having had no idea that anything was wrong. So I don't take any of this for granted. And I also, there's another piece to the story, which is years ago when I was leading a school, I was a principal, and the receptionist who I was very close to, I came into school one morning and my head of school told me she had died.
Wow.
And she'd been fine the day before. And that night, a brain aneurysm erupted and she was dead before she got to the hospital. And the whole day before she died, they were planning that night to go to an event, and the invitation had said there's a choice of chicken or Chilean sea bass. And for some reason, she was so excited about this meal. And all day, everybody is laughing, taking votes. Should eat the chicken or the sea bass? What should you eat? What's she going to eat? She left not knowing yet. We were all coming in with this joking, happy attitude of what did Diane eat? And my daughter got married just a few months ago. It was just a few months after the surgery. And the menu options were chicken and Chilean sea bass. And that was so symbolic to me of, I'm able to be here. I'm able to make this choice. I'm able to eat this meal. I'm able to celebrate with my daughter. The big things and the small things remain available to me because of a series of miraculous coincidences.
Yeah, it's actually true, because I remember hearing a quote by Cher, the singer Cher, who said about her own mother that her own mother says, if it doesn't matter in 5 years, it doesn't matter.
Yes. It's interesting, that quote, to go in a different direction. That's actually a quote that's hurt me in my life. One of my earliest jobs, it was my first job the title was associate principal I worked for. He was a wonderful man, and he was a mentor to me, and he had a heart condition, and he would say, my doctor said no stress. And he said, I'm a principal, they're stressed. And he said, I'm going to say this to you the way that I can. If you get yourself too stressed, you'll die. So this is your choice. So he worked to manage his stress very well, very effectively. And he would say that if it's not going to matter in 5 years, don't worry about it.
Wow.
And you're right. It ended up hurting me, that statement, because I let little things become large and saying it's not going to matter in 5 years. But by not tending to it, it grew bigger, so that something that didn't have to matter ended up mattering. So I've reframed my thinking around that, and I try to live in the calm and not be stressed, but to tend to things, which that's
Ignore that. I can cut here. Hi,
no
Chris,
problem.
just on a Zoom call here. I'll ring you back when it's over. Okay. God bless. Bye. Okay.
No problem. Yes.
He sounded like a wise man, but then again, yes, you can actually neglect something if you have that attitude as well. You might think it's not worthwhile worrying about, but it might actually be very, very worthwhile to worry about.
He was very wise, and I wasn't. I was young and not yet wise enough to take the words and put them into a context. So each time I hear that, I just feel that response, because
you think of him.
I think of him. I think of me, and not tending to the small things before they became big things.
Yeah, there is that. There very much is that actually. Things can kind of have this kind of rolling stone sort of a thing. Starts off really small, but if you neglect it, it gets bigger and bigger and bigger.
That's bigger.
Shira, tell me about why you went out. Did you always want to teach? Did you always want to go down the route of education?
No, I landed in education through also a set of serendipitous coincidences, and love it and feel blessed that this is where I landed. I am an ordained rabbi. I actually
I
consider
didn't
myself
know that.
a
I
rabbi.
didn't know that you were a rabbi.
Yes, I do not publicize it. Yet if asked, I certainly don't hide it. That background and training remains important to me. Although I've
Oh, for
taken on,
God's sake, I have this switched off. Sorry about this.
it's okay.
Geraldine, I'm on a Zoom call at the moment. I'll ring you. No, you're all right, Geraldine. I'll ring you back the minute it's over. Okay, bye. My friend, she was diagnosed with lung cancer. And I haven't spoken. She's a nurse, and she's taken it very badly. So I didn't want to ring her when she rang me the other day to tell me. But yeah, she's taking it unusually badly. Well, not unusually, but where were we now? You're a rabbi.
I am a rabbi. I am an ordained rabbi. I really view myself now as a former rabbi. While I am deeply influenced and grateful for the training I live, I have taken a different path in terms of my life and my actions and my spiritual connection. That being said, I am a rabbi. And so when I was in rabbinical school, I supported myself by teaching afternoon and weekend religious school. And I loved it. And I was really good at it. And so I started taking every elective course I had. I took in the education department, which not a lot of the rabbinical students did. And I was doing really well in those courses. And it was a time where there was a real shortage of educational leaders for Jewish education. And so the school that I was attending and a number of the other schools training Jewish religious leaders, clergy, graduate students were given scholarships for doctorates in education. And so one day the head of the education department asked me if I would go to lunch with him, which seemed extremely odd to me. Went to lunch with him and he offered me a full scholarship to do a doctorate in education. And all I would need to do was complete the doctorate and work for 5 years as a leader in a Jewish school. I ended up working for 18 years in Jewish schools, then another 2 years as principal in a non-Jewish school, and then went off and I've opened my own childcare center and preschool and educational training program for educators. And it's the childcare center and preschool is non-sectarian, is not Jewish, it's not religious, it's play and project based,
Non-denominational.
Totally non-denominational. Yet that was my background. And so
did you find yourself, sorry for interrupting, did you find yourself a bit like you were living in a scene from Yentl?
No. It's so funny. It was such a different world. I was one of the first women to be ordained conservative. I definitely was one of the first women, but it changed. It was like first, but it was like 5 years since they had started accepting women. So the first women had already been ordained. And by that, the floodgates opened really quick. So 50% of my class, although we were really early on in this, were women. And it was not as open as it is now, but much more open and a different kind of a feel at the time.
Did you experience, I suppose, suspicion from male, I don't know what the term for a student rabbi is. Here, if in the Catholic Church, somebody becoming a priest is a student priest. and they go through 7 years of training before they become take that step, because celibacy is involved. But were you met with curiosity, or were you accepted fairly quickly as women? What would you call somebody like yourself?
I would say I even met myself with curiosity. So it was something that was, at the time, it's so hard to think back and remember how different it was. So I started rabbinical school in 1988, and I had never met a female rabbi before at that time. So even for myself to think that this was something that was possible took a lot of work. And early on, I was still in college when I was exploring this, and went to visit the school and was speaking to one of the women who was, just a few years ahead of me, but a few years was like a lifetime in that, because things were changing so fast. She had said, yeah, thinking about becoming a rabbi was like thinking about becoming a tree. It wasn't something you could do. So even for myself, it felt, it felt very strange at the time. It's so interesting to say that now, because it's not that way now. For the most part, I found acceptance. Here and there, you would find people who would think it was odd, but that wasn't the worlds. The worlds were segmented so that I very infrequently would be in a world where this would be viewed suspiciously, although certainly those worlds and communities exist.
What do you think? I suppose, what do you think that women, I suppose we are very different, if you like, from men in many respects. We'll be very similar in other respects. What do you think that women can bring to, from my perspective, the priesthood? We still don't allow women priests. Women can work within the church, but usually as in a role aside from the priest. The priest is always a man. But what do you think that women can bring to rabbinic
work
life that almost matches or betters, if you like, what a man can do in that same role?
I think we're all unique individuals, and I think that we all take on components of what's viewed as masculine and what's viewed as feminine. I think there are many men in the clergy who embody that softer side of humanity. They're choosing this path, so that says a lot about them to begin with. So I don't know how much women have changed the essence of what the rabbinate is. It's hard to sort through, because so many other things have combined to change what the essence of the rabbinate is. So much has changed in the world, and that's certainly a part of it. I think that excluding half of humanity from anything is not what I would ever view as okay in religion, without trying not to be judgmental of religions that hold that position. So it's not something that I would ever choose or be comfortable being a part of. Even within Judaism, the strands that separate out women, it's not something that is comfortable to me.
You see, in our own in the Catholic faith, there's constant arguments for married priests, for priests being allowed to marry. Then there's also the opposing argument that if priests marry, then they can be moved to a parish, maybe in Ethiopia or in anywhere obscure, and the family then might not necessarily be able to go with them, and it tears families apart. And that, going back to, I suppose, the Bible, the 11 of the 12 apostles were married, were single men. Only one was married. So you have that. Well, they were all single men, and that's why they must remain single. Of course, it's not as simple as all of that, but within Judaism, and from your perspective, I suppose, you can be both a female and a male. And as you quite rightly said, there are some females who are positively have male traits in that they're strong, and they can be stronger than other females, and vice versa. You can have men with very, very gentle and very, I suppose, female traits, if you like, loving traits or kindness traits. What do you think of that?
Well, I think that,
you think it's
for
good
me,
to have married
yeah.
rabbis?
So about what?
The idea of a married rabbi would never be in, say, the Catholic Church would never have a married priest, unless in certain African countries they're allowing priests to marry, but not in certainly in the Western world. As a rabbi, you can be both married and female, which is it's liberating. Yes. In many respects.
It is. For me, religion is about connecting to that higher source that we call God. One can call it whatever one calls it. And we do that through whatever means we know how, and that's through cultural means. So for me, I always believe that every religion has value when expressed in a way that's not oppressive to others. We've also seen religion that takes on all of the horror of authority and can oppress in and of itself. So for me, it's how does one find their own path to that connection to that higher power and living in their purpose and living into the highest version of themselves? And how does one do that in a way that feels connected, both culturally and in terms of their background and in terms of themselves as an individual? And so that shifts and changes by definition, and it evolves over time. And there are some traditions and some people that evolve and shift and become more open to the changes faster than others. All of us change. None of us are the way it was 2,000 years ago. How could we possibly be?
No, you couldn't possibly be. Everything has to evolve somehow, whether for the good or the bad. But rev abilities. Explain to me what rev abilities is, because before we go on to that, would you still consider yourself a rabbi, or part-time or past?
I don't consider myself a rabbi. I was ordained as a rabbi. So in that sense, people will say once ordained as a rabbi, you're always a rabbi. It's not something that you throw off. I went through that training. I was ordained. That means something spiritually and religiously. I don't practice as a rabbi, and it's not core to my identity, my present identity. It's core to my past identity, and I cherish that past identity.
And you bring it with you. And you bring it along with you on this journey.
I absolutely do. I don't regret anything that I did or was.
No.
But I've become.
I do think that everything that we do in life, people say, "Oh, I should never have done that," or "That was a waste of." I used to think when I went to art college, I used to think, "Oh, that was a waste of 4 years," but I realized all the things that I learned in art college that helped me along the way, the finishing things on time, having things done to a schedule, brainstorming, not doing the first thing that comes into your head, just thinking out the processes and things like that have carried me forward in my research. I told you I did literature about childhood under Nazism. I also did all the artwork for my book. So, you carry things along with you in life that probably nothing's wasted. So education is never wasted.
Absolutely.
And it's always something that's right for you at that particular moment. May not be right for you as it wasn't for me in whatever 4 years after I started it. But I was able to carry it along with me. And to this day, the same as you've brought yours into. What do you think you've brought from that learning into your present?
A deep sense of empathy, a deep
Yeah.
sense of
Understanding difference.
learning, being grounded in ancient wisdom while being open to new ideas.
Yeah, that's a great answer. That really is good. That really is the essence of it, bringing the past and embracing the contemporary, but having a solid hold on your past as well, because you can't proceed without the past. I fully believe in order to proceed, you must have a backward glance at the past. It's the same with my research, say in World War II. Unless you actually know what happened then and research what happened then, you're very much in danger of repeating the same mistakes.
Absolutely.
A different other this time, perhaps, but the same intolerance. Unless you bring your past with you. People say, oh, leave the past in the past. I don't believe that. I believe what was in the past was there and it was there so that you can learn from it, but you can bring the best of it along with you as you're going. Does that make sense?
It entirely does. And it's actually a beautiful segue into what I'm doing now. Mm-hmm. The education that I still embraced, but embraced even more before the pandemic, was what's called Reggio-inspired learning, and it's play and project-based learning, and it's an approach to learning that was developed in northern Italy and in the days following World War II. So it was Villa Sella, the Reggio Emilia area of northern Italy. And it was an area that had been very active in the resistance against Italian fascism. So the area was devastated both by British bombing and by Italian forces. And there was a group of first mothers, and then they brought in other villagers, folks who had been very active in the resistance, facing devastation, needing to rebuild their community and their lives. And they decided that what they needed most was to build a preschool to prepare their children to fight the oppression, inequity, and injustice that would come in the future. They knew that the war was over, but oppression and injustice, inequity were not.
It's human nature.
And they built this preschool. And they built the preschool out of the bricks of bombed out buildings on land donated by a farmer. They got their money from a tank and a few horses that the Germans had left behind when they fled really quickly. And they designed this preschool. And their approach and their vision spread and is considered today one of the premier, most effective ways of teaching in the early childhood space. And I always loved the approach. And many who embrace Reggio-inspired learning are enamored, as I am, truly, with the relationship-rich environment that's created, the following children's interests, the documentation of children's learning, lots of components of the learning. For me, it was always about that founding moment in what do you do in this moment of devastation? And how do you build? And so here they were taking a past that was never really past because oppression wasn't over. Fascism wasn't over. So they were going to ground their children in a way of being independent thinkers who could stand strong to whatever was thrown at them. And for me at heart, that's what excellence in education is. And that was my approach and what Rev Abilities emerged from. So I started this, I had led schools, and I was always enamored, although the bulk of my experience is K-5, so I was enamored with the early childhood space and how powerful setting a foundation.
What is K-5?
Kindergarten through fifth grade. I apologize. Thank you for asking. So yes, so I'm using U.S. centric terms. I apologize, but from the ages of
We'd say
about
Montessori
5
to fifth class, I think.
Okay, perfect.
Or
So thank you.
first class. It would be to 5-year-olds, is it?
Well, so where my background is from 5-year-olds to 11-year-olds. But
Yeah.
now my school is from children 6 weeks, the itsy bitsy babies, to
Wow.
5.
Okay,
Yes.
that
So
was
I
the
have
kindergarten with us.
the infants, the toddlers, and the preschoolers. And I was able to start the school. And we are just north of New York City. And we were one of the first and worst COVID hotspots in the United States. The first lockdown in the United States happened just a few miles from us. Before there were other knockdown, it was this 1 mile area. We look back and laugh now because, the journalists were coming in saying, what's it like to be in quarantine before the world went into quarantine? And we never closed. We were deemed an essential business and everything shut down, and my school remained open. And we learned so much, and we transformed, and we grew. And through this adversity that would have been science fiction to us months before,
Yeah.
we kept getting better. We just kept getting better. And that adversity brought out strength in us that we didn't know was there. And I wasn't alone. I knew I wasn't alone. I knew it was happening.
It's amazing, though, how things that will happen that look adverse will have such positive, I suppose, impact in your life, because it'll steer you in a direction. You probably might have been going on that path, and suddenly you're forced into this pathway. And you could argue that it's fate, or you could argue that it's just chance. But I actually think it's fate, because I think nothing happens without a purpose. There's a purpose for all our lives. And I think from the moment that we might be taking wrong paths throughout life, but somehow or other we'll end up finding the right path for us. I've yet to find the right path for me. I have it, but you don't,
you're on the path. You're finding that way. Yes. So I do believe that we choose paths. And there was this moment early on in the pandemic where we were open, and my center can accommodate up to 128 students. And we dropped overnight to 6 because the only children coming, everybody was in lockdown. The only ones coming were the children of essential workers who had to go to work, who had to go out.
Yeah.
So, and it's hard to remember those early days of the pandemic, right? Like, these are kids of essential workers. We don't know if they're exposing us. We figured out the health and safety protocol 3 months before New York State gave them to us.
Can I ask you, did your faith, when you were a rabbi, as you say, and you were obviously deeply spiritual, did that sense of spirituality, which I sometimes think was lost in the whole of COVID, and that, churches were closed down, synagogues, mosques, all of this were closed down. And you say to yourself, but where does spirituality and faith, and I don't even necessarily mean, I suppose, faith in a Messiah or anything, but faith, I suppose, that things are going to get better. If you can't go into your religious, your spiritual place of prayer, if you like, or you refuse to go in, surely that's something about yourself, that you've lost some sense of faith. Do you understand what I'm saying? I've always found it difficult that priests here in this country, the church, kind of said, okay, but we'll close down. And many of us were saying, but isn't this the time when we should have faith that God is a higher power, and that he's not going to allow this to continue, and we're safe within the church? If you can't be safe within your synagogue or within your church, where can you be safe? To a spiritual person?
Yeah. So what happened for me was I felt myself at a moment like the founding of that first Reggio school.
Yeah.
And I had never imagined that I would be standing in this moment of history of such crisis. And there were two narratives in education at the time. The louder narrative, and I guess everywhere, I guess as you talk about churches, I guess the narrative probably existed in religion. It probably existed in many areas where we connect as humans on a core level. One narrative was how horrible this was.
Yeah. Yeah.
It was horrible, and nobody can say the lives lost, the millions of lives lost, that this wasn't a horrific loss
Yeah.
and mourning and the grief. Um, there was another narrative, which was, yes, all of that is true. We're not denying that this is horrible, but we can face this with strength and with courage and
Exactly. And
resilience.
with a sense of belief that things are going to get better. Because once
Yes.
anyone I've interviewed, survivors from the Shoah and other, I interviewed Mariam Ibrahim, who was sentenced to death in the Sudan. And along with her, well, she was imprisoned with her baby boy and she was pregnant. And the only thing that got all of them through was faith. And
Yeah.
and they were like, some of them were Jewish, some of them were Jewish. Mariam was Catholic, but her father was Muslim, and because she wouldn't convert to Islam like her father, she was sentenced to death for apostasy. But what got them all through was this sense that things are going to be better tomorrow. And if that's taken from you, I think no matter what is going on around you, if you haven't got the faith that things are going to get better, and if the churches or the synagogues and the mosques aren't there for you to actually share that sense of faith with, then I think it was made twice as hard, the lockdown, because people didn't have these spiritual homes to go to. And
yeah, the isolation was hard, and I'm blessed in not having experienced that, in having been at the center every day. I wrote a book through that time, which is called Havens of Hope. So I didn't use the term faith, but it's been coming up more and more in terms of realizing that what I was trying to create and did create in the center was a place where there wasn't fear, where we could leave the fear at the door.
Exactly. And that's what I think I'm getting at, where that's what you were able to bring from your past and from your past studies, was this sense of bringing together people in this tranquil space, this space where they were together with a group of like-minded people, and that there's nothing worse than isolation, and you can be isolated in a crowd.
Yes.
But these children had a place to go to. I mean, I think when you've lost all sense of hope that things are going to get better, and you're stuck in a house on your own, and you have no sense of belief in anything, in God or Yahweh or Muhammad or whoever that you believe in, or believe in nobody. But you need that sense of, I think, purpose in life to keep going. And to be honest with you, I think locking people down during COVID took away all sense of purpose in life. And I think if you haven't got purpose, you might as well not have anything. You have to have some reason to get up in the morning and go out. And if you're locking yourself in because you're afraid you're going to die if you go outside or you meet another human being, and if every person you meet is a potential virus to you, which we were for a long time, then what value is life to you? You have to have this urge to get up and go out, and to believe that things are going to get better.
Yeah, and to believe that you have some agency to make things better, at least in your little part of the world. And that's what I held on to, that I couldn't stop COVID. I couldn't solve the global challenges, but I could create a place for the children who were coming each day, for the teachers who were coming
Exactly.
each
Yeah.
day. That was what I called a haven of hope. And then the other thing that I could do, I looked for the things that I could do. And yes, I agree with you. It was that need for purpose and to do whatever it was in my power to do, however small that was. So in the United States, there were the Paycheck Protection Plan loans that went out, which were forgivable loans for small businesses to continue to keep employees on payroll and continue to pay the rent. And um, the first round, I had gotten in my application. I read everything about it. I got my application within a couple of hours. In the first round, I didn't get it. And what had happened was really a travesty in which the large companies, large corporations, more powerful folks were getting the money before the small businesses that it was really intended to. And that was corrected. The second round, I did get it. And not only did I get it, but I realized that I had figured out how to navigate through and get it. And so I volunteered to teach other childcare centers in my area how to do this, and walked about 30 other programs through how to get these loans, feeling I do not want anyone's business not to make it through, that I have the ability to help show them how to get the resources that they are entitled to. And they are the people that this is intended for.
Do you know, it is amazing. One thing I've learned through COVID is the power, I suppose, of the internet, and the power of the internet as a communicative device. I mean, we would never have thought of Zoom before COVID. We were trying to start off our little station, and everything went pear-shaped. And then I saw Zoom, and I thought, well, this is one way of getting to interview people, is via Zoom. And you found the same now, to be able to go on the internet and help people who to prevent.
Well, actually, this wasn't the internet. So yeah, I mean, I did go on the internet, and the people that I'm interviewed in my book were, I put out a few posts on social media saying, are you an educator who's getting better? And people responded. So definitely that was very part of my life. My life through COVID was very different than the experience of most, in that I was an essential business. I was open. I was going to a physical place each day.
Yeah.
The people that I helped were mostly on the phone. Frankly, they were local people in my own county. I reached out to the local childcare council and said, is there anyone who needs help? I'll help them. And was reaching out to them. So it was that piece of it was very old school. And my experience through COVID was we did have online learning for the kids whose families during that period that people were in lockdown who could be, and learned how to do that, which when people first said, video learning for infants, toddlers, and preschools, it sounded to me like the stupidest thing I had ever heard. And then we did it. We pulled it off. So
how did you do it? How can you? I'm trying to visualize how an infant from 6 weeks, is that what you said? 6 weeks, 5 years.
Yeah. So, I mean, it wasn't the 6-week-old babies, but we would have some from like 5 or 6 months up on through the preschool. So the preschoolers would be, sitting in their rooms or living rooms. The infants would be like kind of propped up in their high shoes watching, and you'd have the baby smashing the bananas listening. And we would sing and dance, and the ones who were already walking would get up and dance and do games and movement, and just hearing a story that the teacher they love is telling, seeing her voice, hearing her voice, seeing her face, even through Zoom, was so powerful at the time. And then we gave the parents activities that they could do with kids at home. So it wasn't the same. And there are programs still doing it now. There are all kinds of reasons that people can't access the kind of program that they want. And it offers flexibility and opportunity for us, and my people in my school. They always wanted to come back in person. That was always the preference, and what we got back to fairly quickly. But But yeah, I mean, the kids, they'd sit and they'd hear their name and they'd perk up and they'd hear the singing and they'd sway to it. And it was connection. This is what you said,
But
that, isolation.
when you were talking there about it's not the same as naturally, nothing is the same as meeting somebody face to face and having that face to face communication. But one would imagine, I've taught Irish dancing for many years, and you're there with children who are maybe 3, 4, 5, and they've attention spans of fleas. They're so small at some stage, and you're trying to get them to look at you and to look at your feet when you're trying to focus them down at their feet, and you're saying the left foot, please, and then you're saying no, the other left foot, because you're looking at them. So what you do in your left foot, they do in their right foot, and then they're on the same foot, and you're saying the left foot, and some wise little one puts out her left foot, and you say no, the other left foot. But the thing I'm saying is that when you're on Zoom or you're online and you're talking to a very young child, it's teaching them to focus, because they're looking to see where's the voice coming from. If you're right in front of them, they'll probably know, well, she's there, I'm going over there. But if you're like we are now here, a toddler is probably going to develop that focus even more, I would imagine, when they have to sit here to actually see you. But if they know that they can wander around the room and they can still see you inside in the room, they're less focused, I think. And a lot of the Irish dancing teachers ran their dancing classes on Zoom. Some of them thought it was fantastic because it could focus them on footwork. Others hated it because they like to see the child move on the floor. There's different ways of looking at it, I suppose, but I do think it can get you to focus.
Yeah, I think what we learned is that education can be done different ways, and there's no one right way. And education has so long been criticized as being so slow to change, and we changed literally overnight. And that has the potential, if we take it in that way, to give us the confidence to know that when we changed because we had no choice, we can continue to change because we choose to, and we can try things and we can see what works and we can experiment. It's always an experiment. So
always.
Each human being is different and unique. The way you get to one child is not connect with one child is not the way you connect with another child. And the way one teacher connects is not the way another teacher connects. And what one family needs is not what another family needs. So there are now online preschools, and they work. Not for everybody, but they work.
I think that it worked for me, because my nuns in school used to say to my mother, oh, Maura, she's very bright, but if she stopped looking out the window, counting the leaves on the trees, looking out the window, I just hadn't got that focus. I was always creating things in my head.
Yes. You had a naturally creative mind.
I'm a very creative person, but like any spare moment at all in my brain, and I'm thinking I could do this or I could do that, and maths might be on, and I'm thinking, no, I'll zone out now, and I'll make up a dance step in my head, or I'll draw something. Just
so how can we value that in education, those creative minds that are not
I don't think the creative mind, certainly in Ireland, I think they're starting to bring it in now in the educational system a little bit more, but I think creative beings like me are kind of like thought of as being, they're just artists, or they're just creative people into drama, and whereas there seems to be an overemphasis on science and mathematics and subjects like that. And you're thinking not every child is going to be into science or mathematics, but the people who are creative are the ones who actually invent. They're the ones whose ideas become reality. Right. The daydreamers are the people. It takes the daydreamers to eventually become the people who create, or to give the inspiration to the people who create, in order for us to have the buildings and to have everything that we function with. Everything from the kettle that you use to make your tea had to have a creative brain behind it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And so that's such a powerful question. And it has struck me that education stands at a moment, if we choose to take it, to develop into something very different than what we've been. And so, as you saw during the pandemic, at least in the United States, I don't know if this happened in Ireland, but there were pods, tiny, tiny schools that met in people's homes oftentimes, that some of them have stayed developed and developed into full-on micro schools, small schools, with their own vision and their own way of working. And so there's so much potential, so many systems that are so hard to change, but so many ways to maneuver. And if we choose to, we can, as I said at the beginning, in our own corners of the world, in our own spheres of influence. And if we join together people who are doing this work, then all of those small acts become really big acts together.
Yeah, it's like, there are so many schools now, and they're so big that some children fall through the cracks, because it's impossible for any teacher to have a very bright child, a very bright, child who's good at learning and good at and quick to pick up and has a good memory for remembering when it comes to exams. Then you have the very bright child who might be bright in a different way, but at a slower pace, or have their own. They might be following their own path in life, through that journey. It's very difficult for a teacher to be all things to all people. And I just think that, if, as you say, those pods, if you had groups of of children who were all like-minded, creative children together, children who almost like, I suppose, study groups, children who were into mathematics and into sciences and into physics and subjects like that, all meeting up together, then they usually help each other along the way, but they don't feel that they're being held back, or they don't feel that they're holding people back. Does that make sense?
It makes a huge amount of sense. And
there's nothing worse than feeling, oh God, I don't know what the teacher is saying, and I'm afraid to put my hand up, because if I put my hand up, I'll look like a fool.
Right. Or feeling that your own passion and your own strengths don't have value, right? When we know how they do. So that's where I went from all of this. And I still happily run Discovery Village, and I also run Revabilities, which is a training center for educators, purpose-driven educators, to start, grow, and transform schools or educational businesses so that they can stand out by what they stand for, and they can provide a purpose-driven approach to learning that they believe in, and that can attract the people who are right for them and who align with what it is that they're offering. And it doesn't have to be the way governments create education typically, which it's standardized to be organized. But people aren't standard. So standardization doesn't serve.
It just serves to come to bring you from A to B to C and finally to D. But what you learn along the way, most people will forget in their lifetime. It's just they're just studying basically to get a result, to know I was good at remembering. I could learn for an exam and remember. I had very good retention, but I was also the creative type of person, and mathematics, I just convinced myself that was it. This is insane. Why anyone would want to know this is now. I wish I was good at it in school, and I wish I was good.
And you could be if you chose to. You totally could be with your.
I think my mother told the nuns used to say Mary's very good at maths, and my mother used to say, "Sister, I think you have her wrong. She's fooling you. She's good at adding, And my mum convinced me I was bad at maths. So I just believed her.
Yeah, we take in these stories and they don't have to be. And we can find our own purpose and we can learn different things, and there's so many ways of learning and of being, and so that's deserves to be experimented with. And it's so striking to me that during COVID, districts figured out how to get computers and internet access to every student, impoverished students, homeless students. They found a way to make this happen.
Oh, they didn't do that here in Ireland.
Yeah.
I was,
Yeah.
that was a big bugbear with me. There's children on the streets for years. Their families are in hotels because they've lost their homes, and you're saying, well, in our constitution it says that all children are created equal, but they're certainly not in this country, because when you have children who have to leave bed sits and hotels at 9 o'clock in the morning, go to school, their parents are wandering the streets until 9 o'clock at night, and they've no computer, and they weren't able to go to school, and they had to wander around the streets until 9 that night. How were they supposed to study? How in God's name were they equal to any other child?
Yeah, everywhere there remains huge and painful and devastating inequity. And
no, we dealt. I don't think it was dealt with well here. I mean, it was all well and good telling people, even if they had a laptop, that if you had a mother and a father who were non-Irish and the child was trying to learn the Irish language, which it's taught in our schools here, and they had nobody at home to teach them Irish, they weren't going to be in the same league as somebody who was doing their everything through Irish. And if they had hardly any food, and they were hungry, and they were expected to actually do a full day school on Zoom or whatever, and they couldn't. It was a barbarous time, in my view, and unnecessary, I think, personally.
Yeah. My experience in my tiny, tiny school in my tiny corner of the world was that we found the way to improve. And there were people that found the way to improve. Good. Amidst a huge amount of adversity and devastation and inequity and injustice and oppression. And all of that is real. And my optimism is no means to deny that painful, horrific reality. It is to say that if there's a will to change it, there's a way to change it.
There has to be a will.
Yeah, there has to be a will.
I don't think there was that will with, I mean, we've done a lot of good in this country, but God, there's a lot that needed to have been, there was a lot of people gained a lot of money and a lot of people suffered.
Yeah, that's true. That's absolutely true.
There was no parity, there was no equality. But where to from now? Where to with you from now?
So where to from now, again, in my small corner of the world, I feel so committed to helping educators who want to start, grow, and transform schools and educational businesses into places that are purpose-driven, that are what I've come to call, is the name of the book, havens of hope, and that do
I must read that.
Bring a vision. Yeah, it's coming out this summer, so it's available for pre-order. And to find ways to create your to bring your vision from your heart and from your mind out into the world, and to realize that you don't You don't have to change a whole country. You don't have to change the whole world. You can start your own small school. And if enough people start their own small schools or their own small programs or their own small social support, whatever it is that one is working on, if one wants to work on hunger, if one wants to work on homelessness, whatever it is, that there are ways to start businesses that are grounded in purpose, whether they're organized as businesses or as nonprofits, it doesn't even matter. But organizations of heart that are there to make a difference in the ways that they can.
Yeah. I must talk to you after this.
Absolutely.
I'll email you. Well,
absolutely.
Shira Leibowitz, thank you very, very much for being my guest today on My Story.
Thank you so much.
Shalom.
Thank you, Mary. Shalom.
Shalom. How do I?